Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mylio Photos Coffee Break. My name is Angela Andrew, and today we're going to be talking about organizing files and folders. This is a big topic, so I'm going to do things a little bit different today. I usually don't bring slide decks into these presentations. I try to keep them short and sweet, but organizing files and folders is kind of a big topic, and there's a lot of little points I want to cover. So hopefully the slide deck is helpful, keeps us on track. For today's presentation, what I would like is if you have questions to go ahead and put them into the chat if they're related to today's topic. Lori, if you wouldn't mind calling those out, and feel free to interrupt me if there's something that's on point on topic. If you have questions, other Q&A that you'd like to cover about Mylio in general, about photography, family history, all of that, we will have time at the end for open Q&A, and I'm always happy to take those questions, but we're going to try to keep focused and on target for files and folder organizing. So let's go ahead and jump into today's topic. So organizing files and folders in Mylio is something that we've been getting a lot of questions about. And I wanted to take some time to dive into this and walk you through some of the things that I think are important to know as you get in and work with the actual files and folders in your library. Let's start off with file management in Mylio Photos. So the first thing to understand is how Mylio works with your computer's file system. Mylio is a direct connection to the folders and files that live on your computer. When you import photos into Mylio, Mylio does not actually physically hold your photos. What it does is it points to where they live on your computer. So that's something that gets misunderstood a lot when people are new to Mylio Photos is they imported their pictures into Mylio, and even sometimes they're like, oh cool, they're now in Mylio, I can delete them from my computer. Please, please, please don't do that, especially if you're linking folders, because if you delete them off of your computer, then Mylio doesn't know where they went. So you end up with things that are called lost originals, and you end up with all sorts of problems. You end up with lost data. Mylio is looking directly at your files and folders in your computer's file system for its resources. So let me just jump over here to Mylio and give you an example of what that looks like. I'm here in Mylio. I am in the folders view. So you can see that it's in the folders view because I have a little folder over here highlighted. And at the top here, it says folders. That means I'm in the top level. So one of the folders that Mylio creates on your computer is the Mylio inbox. I'm going to go ahead and click on this to select it. You see that it has the blue border. And I'm going to right click on it and choose Reveal in Finder. If you're on Windows, that would be Reveal in Explorer. And this actually takes me into my file system and shows me exactly where this folder lives. And you can see if I go ahead and go back here in the structure, it's in my user folder and under my username, under Mylio, and there's that Mylio inbox folder. It is an actual folder that lives on this computer. Now you'll see that there's probably a lot of things that are actually in that inbox folder that you're not seeing here right now. You're only seeing metadata. That's because these files are synchronized and saved on my vaults. They're saved elsewhere because my computer is set to space saver. It's managing the storage, but the folder still exists here. So here, there's the Mylio inbox. You'll also see there's a shortcut for it here in your favorites. This is to make it easy for you to just drop things in there, and Mylio will know to bring those pictures, whatever files you put into that Mylio inbox, into your library. But it is a direct connection to what's in this folder. So that's the first thing to understand about Mylio is Mylio is talking directly to your file system. So let's go ahead and switch back to the slide deck here and talk about folders. Another thing that people often don't quite grasp until they've been using Mylio for a while is that every folder in Mylio is a linked folder. So if I jump back over here to my Mylio and take a look at this, you know how I just right-clicked on this folder and showed it to you in my library, in my file system? That's because that is a link. So even the ones that are up here at the top, even ones that Mylio creates, every folder you see here is linked, meaning you can find it in the file system. If you put new media into that folder, Mylio will read it and show it in the library. Now, the reason this can get a little bit confusing is because if you go up here to add media, and let's say add media accessible from this device, and I'm just going to go to my desktop and choose a random folder here that has a few pictures and choose open. The options we have here are to link them, copy them, or move them. And link them sounds like it's something very, very different. The mechanics of it are a bit different in that this is telling Mylio, hey, here's a new folder to watch. This leaves the files where they are and tells Mylio, watch this new source, any new media that's added there, bring that into the library. This is a new thing I want Mylio to keep an eye on. If you use the copy and move, what that's going to do is ask you to pick a folder that's already in your library to copy or move those pictures to. So you're still using these different linked folders that you have available. It's just using one that's already there. Link brings in a new folder and tells Mylio, hey, watch this new location. So that's the differentiation there. Lori, are there any questions so far?
Not yet. Oh,
Awesome.
wait,
Okay.
Lori, actually, Lori has one. Sorry, she just popped up here. Lori with an I is asking, is marking a folder as a library folder just as a visual benefit?
No, there is more to it, and we are going to get into that here later in the presentation, but that is a great question, and we will certainly cover it. All right.
I have a
So let's go
question,
ahead.
if I may
Yeah, go
ask.
ahead.
You're
Sure.
saying that maybe on the desktop, there's a file that you want to put in Mylio inbox.
Mhm.
Doesn't Mylio catch all of the pictures everywhere on your computer?
No, it does not. You have to tell Mylio where your pictures are. So when you go and you open up Mylio Photos for the first time, you're going to get the guided import. So if I go up here to File and Guided Import, when you first launch Mylio Photos, this is what you see. And you tell Mylio where your pictures are at. It'll then look at those folders. Let's say if you add the pictures folder, it adds that as a linked folder. And it tells Mylio, hey, any media that's in this folder, let's show it in Mylio. But it does not scan your computer and find things for you. That's a good
Thank
question,
you.
though. And that's something that we hear a lot. All right. Any other questions before we move on?
Yes, Edward has his hand up.
Sure, Edward, go ahead.
Edward, you have a question
Edward?
for us? Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, let's
I
go ahead
have
and
to
carry
sign
on
off.
then.
Yeah, I,
Oh,
Oops.
there you go. Are you
yeah, I
there?
forgot to acknowledge it was a recorded event.
Oh,
I,
no problem.
I have, when I open up Mylio, it says My Photos Library. I have at the top, it says Apple Photos, because I'm on a Mac. It's Mylio Inbox and Mylio Pictures.
Yep.
Nothing is in the inbox, which is, I'm hoping is the way I want it. But I've got two folders in Mylio Pictures, and I don't know how they got there. I don't want them there.
Okay.
But if I delete them,
Those are good.
are they going to disappear like out of my Apple Photos? What's going to happen to them if I delete them?
So when you delete something in Mylio, it deletes it from your hard drive as well. So
Yeah,
let's start with your Mylio inbox. You mentioned that it's empty. That's
yeah,
perfectly fine.
yeah.
If you wanted to put things in there, if you're browsing through around your computer and you find a picture you want in Mylio, you can just drop it in the inbox. It'll then appear in this folder, and then you can refile it. And we'll talk a little bit later about how to move things around from within Mylio. And if you have things in a Mylio pictures folder that you don't know how they got there, what I would do is look at those pictures. If they're pictures that you want, there's two
Yeah.
things. If you don't want them in Mylio at all, you can go ahead and go into the file system and move them out of that folder. And there's ways to do that. The other thing is if those are pictures you just absolutely don't want, you can delete them and that will permanently delete them from your computer. If there are pictures that they actually belong in your Apple Photos and somehow they accidentally got moved, I'll show you how to move them back here in a bit, but that's very, very easy.
Okay,
So
don't
it
worry
just
about
depends
it.
on what you want to do with them.
You answered the question. Don't delete them till I figure out how to.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
You're very welcome. All right, let's go ahead and jump back into the presentation and navigating the folders view. So most of you have been around Mylio for a while, so these are going to be kind of basic things, but I just want to point out a few things about the folders view that you might not know. So one of the little tricks that I love is while you're browsing in the folders view, you get into, several folders, maybe you go several folders deep, and you just want to jump back up to the top level. You can go back over here to the folders icon in the left sidebar, double click that, and that brings you back to the top level. So that's a quick little tip for you there. And then using the left panel navigation folder tree. Now this is a relatively new feature that was added in Mylio that makes it much easier to browse your folders and much more visual. So If you're used to using it this way, you absolutely continue to do that. But if you like a more traditional folder tree, down here in the bottom left, there's this little navigation icon. You can click that, and that's going to open up a folder tree. You can search by a folder name up here at the top, and you can then go ahead and click into a folder and see the subfolders. So this is very, very handy in a variety of ways, and we're going to use this a little bit later in the presentation to move things around and to find things. But this is an awesome way to navigate around your library and click into certain folders and find certain things. So I just wanted to make sure that if you hadn't yet discovered this navigation, that you know that that's there. Now, each section of the folders view, this is where we start talking about those library folders. What I'd like to do, so let me go ahead and go back here and jump back up here to the top of my folders view. And I'm going to go ahead and hide that navigation and make this view a little bit smaller. So I can grab the slider here on the side. I'm just going to drag that down so you can see each of the different sections I have here in my folders view. So at the top, we have our Mylio Photos library. By default, that's going to have your Mylio inbox. Many of you may have a Mylio Pictures folder. That's a default folder that Mylio creates. If you don't put any pictures in there, you can delete it if you don't want it. If it's empty and there's nothing there, or you can move those couple of pictures that maybe got stuck there, move them somewhere else. You don't have to keep that folder if you don't want to. Again, it's just a folder that exists on your hard drive, and if it's empty, you can delete it. Now, these are the different top-level library folders that I have in my library. I've got my Apple Photos. If you're an Android user, you're going to have an Android Photos. If you've connected a phone, the next section down is social media. If you've gone to any of the services that are integrated with Mylio to download your Facebook, Instagram, or Flickr photos, Mylio is automatically going to create a folder for those downloads. Once they're downloaded in Mylio, you can take pictures from these folders and move them anywhere else in your organization if you want to. I've chosen to keep mine separate and keep them here in the social media category. I kind of like it. It's a personal choice. Down below, you'll see that I have a few different devices listed, and these are folders that are linked from specific devices. And there's many different reasons why you might end up with this. And you'll notice that actually my folder names that I have here are all the same. That's because I have on each one of my computers, I have two different computers that I use. I have scanned photos with my fast photo scanner from both of those computers. So I have a fast photo folder on both. I also do a lot of photo editing, and I have some project folders that I've named the same, and they live inside the pictures folder of my computer. So I'm here right now on my Intel MacBook. Let me go ahead and just right click on this HDR merge, show in Finder. And you'll see right now I'm in my pictures folder. There's that HDR merge. There's that HDR to process, which is right next to that. And there's the fast photo that's right here. I have similarly named folders with different media on my other computer, which is why I have these separate. So that's a really good illustration of why you might want to say, this folder belongs to this machine, this folder belongs to this machine over here, but I want to be able to see them all in Mylio. And that just lets me know which one those live on. So hopefully that illustrates that well for you guys. When I first saw it with the same folder names from different devices, that's when it really kind of made sense to me why these linked folders are down here. Now, the question we had earlier was moving things to become library folders. So let me jump back over here to the presentation real quick, is that you can manage your linked folders in the dashboard, and you can mark a folder as a library folder. What that means is I could go to one of these folders and I could say, I don't want it to be here associated with my MacBook. I want it to be up here as a top-level Mylio Photos library folder. So what I can do is go over to my dashboard. I'm going to choose this Mac that I'm on right now and go over here to linked folders. On this one, I'm going to scroll down, and let's say I wanted to make this HDR merge folder a library folder. I can go ahead and click on that, and you'll see that we have a few options here. Now, most people aren't going to need to mess with this. There's not necessarily a great reason to do this, but if you wanted to get in there and take a look, we get a lot of questions, so I wanted to make sure you guys have the information of what this means. What I can do is mark this folder as a library folder. This does a couple of things. The most important is that it does move it up just in the visual of that top level in your Mylio Photos folders view. It doesn't physically move that folder off of that computer. The folder stays there, but when you mark it as a library folder, that folder then becomes subject to the sync policy for that device. And I know those are a lot of kind of confusing words, so let me kind of try to break this down. So when you have a computer or any device really associated with Mylio, especially if it's a viewing device like a computer, a tablet, or a phone, those are typically set to what we call space saver. And what Mylio does is if you have a couple of vaults where you keep all of your originals, Mylio tries to manage the space it uses on that computer. So it stores all of those original quality files on your vaults and keeps optimized and thumbnail versions along with your metadata just on that computer. And that takes up a lot less space than having all of your originals. When you link a folder that's on your internal hard drive, such as this folder that's in my pictures folder, Mylio doesn't move it and it doesn't take those originals and move them elsewhere. Those originals are still in that location. And then if I have a vault, they are also copied to that vault. So there's an additional copy over there. Now, if I go ahead and I mark this as a library folder, what that does is it tells Mylio, hey, let's make these all relate to the sync policy for this device. So instead of having those files in original form always stored on this computer, Mylio is going to then make them into space saver, which if it needs space, it's going to offload those files. And they'll still be stored, still accessible on your vault. It doesn't get rid of them, but you may not see those originals on that computer in that folder if you go into the file system. If you want to override that, you can toggle this switch here and this says keep files imported on this device. That will override it. So that's something to consider if you want to do that. It mostly just changes. For most people, you're not going to notice that underlying change in how it moves things around, but you will see that, let me go ahead and go back here to folders, that it would jump up here to this section instead of being listed here. So that's the biggest thing. It's a personal preference. I've chosen to keep them associated with these different devices because I have folders with the same name. If I made these all library folders and stuck them up here, I wouldn't know which HDR merge folder, for instance, was on which computer. So hopefully that makes sense. Are there any questions on this before we move forward? Because I know this is kind of a confusing topic. I'm hoping I explained it well.
There are a couple other
So,
questions.
I have one.
Oh.
So
Yep.
if
Go ahead.
you and I dealt with this earlier in the week where I made a library
Yep.
folder and it got rid of all my originals on my main digital hub. And I freaked out, but you
Yep.
helped me and they're all back now. But
Perfect.
if I left that keep originals at this location, that wouldn't have happened even though I made it a library folder. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Since you had already done it, it was just easier to make it not a library folder again. So you can reverse it. You can undo that once you've made the change. You can say, basically put it back. So it's not like some big major thing, but it can be a little scary, like what happened earlier this week. You go into a folder, you expect the originals to be there, and Mylio has offloaded them because it's like, oh, I'm trying to save space. You told me to save space. I'm saving space. So that's what's happening when you do that. All right, let's jump back over to the slideshow and start talking about basic file and folder management. So let me show you how to create a new top level folder and a new subfolder. So as you're going through and organizing things, you're probably going to want to create new folders and move things around. So the first thing to know is how to create a new folder. If you want to create a new top level folder, what that's going to do is it's going to put a folder up here under the Mylio Photos library. And to do that, you're going to go down to the navigation on the bottom left. Make sure you don't have anything selected here, because if you select one of these, it's going to create a subfolder. You want a top level folder, you want nothing selected, so then you click create new folder. I'm just going to go ahead and create test and choose create. And now I have a new top level folder. It's that simple. Now let's say I want to go ahead and make a subfolder inside of test. I can go ahead and double click in there and I can right click on this and say new folder. That's one way to do it. I can also be down here on the bottom right and have test selected and then say create new folder. And let's call that subfolder and say create. There we go. And now I have a subfolder inside of test. So here's test, here's subfolder. Creating new folders is very, very simple. And that allows you to decide exactly how you want to have things organized and be able to move things to those folders. And we'll talk about moving things here in just a moment. So you know how to create a new top level or subfolder now. The next thing to know when doing your file and folder management is to use consistent naming. And this is something that I will say, don't stress on going back and making all of your past stuff consistent, but try to use a consistent naming going forward. I will also say that keeping consistency in your folders, in the folder names, is far more important than the individual files. Just for your own sanity's sake, it's not necessary to go back and rename every file. You certainly can, but I'm not sure that it's worth it. So when we're talking about individual folders, this is my preferred naming convention. So I have my top level photos folder. I then have a decade folder, a year, and then I have an individual folder for each day that has a small description at the end of what I did that day. So for example, let's go ahead and jump over here, and I'm going to go into my photos folder, and there's my 2010s, and let's go into 2015. And then I can go down here and there's that 2015-03-19 Sedona. So that is how I like to have my stuff organized. What this does for me is if I do happen to go into my folder system, into my file system on my computer, I can at a glance see what's there. Also, as I'm browsing through Mylio, it's very easy for me to go, okay, this is what I was doing at that particular point in time. You don't have to add that little extra information at the end, but it is searchable and it does visually make it easy to see what's in that folder. That's just my personal preference. There are a lot of different naming conventions you can use, but this is my favorite and this is the one I've stuck with for most things over the years. Now, you've seen in my library, you know, not everything falls into that. There's a lot of exceptions and there's a lot of stuff that I need to organize as well. But this is kind of my gold standard, especially for my professional work and things that I'm capturing going forward. Once we start talking about individual files, what I do is, this is for files that I'm bringing in off of memory cards from my cameras today. So with your individual file names, the file naming that I like to use is a date and then a sequence. Very simple. So it's something a little bit more descriptive than just simply like IMG_1234. I use the dates, so 24 for 2024, 05 for May, 11, and then underscore. I use a 4-digit sequence. That'll give me lots of room. I can't think of a single day where I'm going to capture more than 9,999 photos. So if every single day has that sequence number with that many digits, I have plenty of room to have individual unique file names for all of my pictures. So this is the sequence that I use when I import my photos. So once you do that coming into Mylio, we can go back and take a look at renaming things, files and folders that are already in Mylio. The easiest way to do this is in the info panel. So let me jump back here to my top level of my folders. And let's say I want to rename test folder here. All I need to do is click on it. You can see it's got the blue border that it's selected. Go over to the info panel. Under here in folder name, I can simply click in this field and change the name. So let's just call this empty. That has now been renamed. If I make this bigger here on the right, you'll be able to see that that folder is now titled empty. So that's how easy it is to rename individual folders. You just open up the info panel and change that there into the folder name. Now, if you want to change individual files, it's very, very similar. Let's go ahead and jump into my Mylio inbox, grab a photo here. If I want to change this file name, all I need to do is go down here to file name, and I can simply type in here whatever it is that I want. So this one here, it has actually my original file type in the name. I don't want that there, so I'm going to just delete that out of the name, hit return on my keyboard, and I have now renamed that file. Now, one thing to keep in mind, that direct connection between Mylio and your file system when you're renaming files and folders in Mylio, it is actually renaming them in your computer, on your external drives and your file system. So keep that in mind that those are actual changes that are happening as you go through and make them. If you want to
Question.
batch rename files, oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just real quick question. For the individual files, are you renaming these when you bring them into Mylio or outside of Mylio first?
So when I'm importing new files, if they're pictures that are coming in off of my big camera, for example, what I do is I will go and it usually pops up. If you connect a memory card or camera, it'll pop up with the add media automatically. But it would be here under, let me go ahead and do an open. And typically when you're doing like a memory card, it's going to be a copy. And you can go here under show advanced settings, and you can do file renaming right here. So I can go ahead and set a particular, so a prefix sequence, year, month, day sequence is probably what I would want. And that would automatically rename those files with that particular sequence. So that's how I would do that on import for that. When I do things like family history files coming out of my fast photo scanner, let's go ahead and jump to one of my fast photo files here. That particular device, you can go ahead and set that to create certain file names within the Epson software or within whatever scanner you're using their software. But for instance, these ones do let you put in a name, and then I put in, so this is the first album of my grandma's that I was working on, and then a sequence, and then it does this _A for images that it does an enhanced version of. So if I click between this image and the next one, you can see they're the same photo. This one's a little faded. And then it gives the _A for the one that it did an automatic enhancement of. So I have two versions of it. I do go ahead and keep those automatic names that my scanner assigns. At some point, I may assign it something else, but for right now, I'm going to go ahead and keep those. Things that come in off of my iPhone, let's go ahead and just grab one of these. I'm going to go ahead and look at this in a flattened view so I can see all my pictures. And let's go ahead and grab this one here of pumpkin. This one, it was edited with an external editor. Let's grab a different one here. Let's see what else we can find here that's maybe something that I didn't edit with some of these came in out of third-party apps. So I'm trying to find one that's just a regular, there we go, regular HEIC. And you can see that I actually manually renamed this one. See if I did it with that one too. Some of them I do, some of them I don't. There, that's a normal one. This is how they typically come in off of my phone. I don't usually bother renaming them. You certainly can if you want to, and that's where the batch rename can be helpful if that's something that you really want to do. Let's go ahead and talk about batch renaming. So batch renaming files, the first thing you need to do is be in the everything space. So right now, I am in the public space. This is what I'm usually in when I'm demoing. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the top level of my folders view, go over here to my spaces, and I'm going to switch to everything. It's pin protected on my computer, so I'll just type in my code. And now I have the everything space. You can see there's no space noted here at the top. So in order to batch rename, you do have to be in the everything space. So let's go here to the HDR merge folder. I'm going to select a folder, and you have to do this you have to select a whole folder. You can't just select a group of images within a folder. You have to select an entire folder. So I'm going to do that, right click on this, go to more folder actions, and choose rename files. And again, here you have the option to do a year, month, day, and a sequence. That's probably what I would choose. You also have the option to choose custom. And if you go into the manual, all of the custom options are lined out. If you click on this, it actually does give you definitions of everything. And basically you make a little code that formats it the way that you want. We could probably do an entire coffee break just on these and different ways that you can do this. It's a little bit more complex, but for most cases, just choosing something like year, month, day, and the number for the sequence is probably all that you need. You can go ahead and click that, and it will go ahead and process the batch of images within that folder and rename them with the format that you choose. So batch renaming files is really quite simple. Are there any questions on batch renaming folders before we move on, or files rather?
Lori had a question, is batch renaming pulling from metadata?
Correct, yes. It is pulling from the metadata. So it's going to look at the date that you have in there. Sequence, I'm not sure. I think a lot of times some people will go through and like manually sort things and then want to rename them based on that specific sequence. I don't know that it respects that. So that's something to keep in mind. There are a couple little quirks with that, but it does give you a better name than just IMG 1234. So you can always sort things by date and then go ahead and do your renaming. I think that should keep everything in order. All right. Looks like Jonathan here has a question as well. If you bring in a file and choose to rename when you bring it in, and it is actually a duplicate, will renaming it keep a dedupe from triggering it as a dupe? Okay, so I'm not quite sure I fully understand. When you bring in a file, if you're doing a copy or a move, you actually have the option during the import to exclude suspected duplicates. If you have that checked, it's just not going to bring it in.
Yeah, I was wondering if just changing the name would not bring it in, or would it think of it as a different file because the names are
So
different?
when the file name actually is not a factor that Mylio considers when looking for duplicates. It's going to be looking for things that are the same resolution, the same aspect ratio, the same underlying hash that each photo is assigned, and all of those things. But the file name does not have to be the same for it to be considered a dupe.
Good enough. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so let's talk a bit about moving files and folders. So when you move things in Mylio, you're moving them also in your file system. And what we recommend, if you are a Mylio Photos user, please, please, please do your moving of files in Mylio, not in the file system. The reason I say this, it's not that you can't move things in the file system and make sure Mylio is happy. There are ways to do it, but it is a little bit more complex. And unless you are have a very thorough understanding of your file system and the way that Mylio works, it is easy to create a mess, because if you move things in the file system, Mylio doesn't necessarily know where you put them. So it can cause things like lost originals. It can cause Mylio to think that pictures are missing. It can even, if it's a big enough chunk of things, it can cause catalog corruption. So I highly recommend, if you want to move things around between different folders, do it in Mylio. Don't go into Finder. Don't go into Explorer. Just do it inside of Mylio. So that's kind of rule number one. Those of you who are very technical and you know the little caveats to get around that, you're going to do what you're going to do. But a lot of people can really kind of make a mess if they don't know their file system very well. So I do recommend not doing that. So let's go ahead and show you how to do this in Mylio so it makes it very, very easy. If I want to move an entire folder of media, let's say I want to take empty and I want to put him inside my main photos folder, I can right click on that and say move to folder. And then I can go ahead and navigate here where I want that to go. Since it's a top level folder, it's asking me where, and then I would just go ahead and choose where that needs to go. Let's go ahead and take a look at something that's a subfolder, and that's going to let us move it without even having to touch anything in Finder. So I have some pictures here from Facebook from a long time ago. I can go ahead and grab this folder here and right click on that, say move to folder. And let's say I want to move this to that top level Facebook photos. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll up here to, let's find it. There it is. I could go ahead and select that, and then I could move that entire folder to that top level Facebook folder. And that's going to physically take it where it lives in my hard drive now and move it to a brand new location. So that's how easy it is to move an entire folder. I'm going to go ahead and just while we're continuing to demo here, I'm going to move back into my public space just so I don't accidentally show you things that I'm not supposed to. Let me go ahead and click into this here and grab this picture. Let's say I just want to move the specific photo or a group of photos. I can select one or more photos. Again, right click on that and choose move to folder. And that's going to let me again pick where I want that to go, and it will physically move that one file or the number of files that I have selected to a new location. Very, very, very simple. All right, so that's method number one. There's a few different ways you can move things around in Mylio. That's my favorite, and honestly, to me, the easiest. Now, the second is to do drag and drop with the navigation panel. For some people, this is actually easier than what I was just showing you. So let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. We have our navigation panel open here on the left. If you're not seeing it, click that little navigation icon. And let's take this picture here. So I'm guessing this was probably an iPhone picture. And I want to move this into my Apple Photos folder. What I can do is go ahead and scroll up here to the top. There's my Apple Photos folder. I can just grab that and drag and drop it right there. It's going to ask me, are you sure you want to do that? Because you're actually moving it. Say move. And now that picture has been moved from this folder into my Apple Photos folder. So that's a quick and easy way to do that. You can do that with a group of images. You can grab them here out of the grid and drag them over here into the folder tree to move them around. Very, very simple, very, very easy. Now you'll notice I now have an empty folder here. I can just go ahead and get rid of that. I can right click on that and say delete folder. And that folder will now be deleted from Mylio, and it'll be deleted from my hard drive and all of my connected devices. So that's another thing to understand when you're deleting something in Mylio. It's not only deleting it from the device that you're on or any connected drives that are connected right now. Once your devices have a chance to synchronize and talk to each other, Mylio will delete it from everything. So that's a very good thing, but also something to be very aware of so you know and acknowledge what you're doing when you delete something. The last one I want to talk about is the Mylio clipboard, and this is kind of a little hidden gem inside of Mylio. You may like it, you may not use it. Either way, it's fine, but it's good to know that it's there. So the clipboard is kind of a quick, easy drag and drop for all manner of things. I'm going to go ahead and go into this little folder here. You can see I've got a little comic here, and I actually have a place that I have funnies that I've saved. So I'm going to grab this, I'm going to take it, and anything from the grid, you can do this. So when you're in the grid view, you grab one or more images, and you just click and drag it down to the bottom of the screen. This is the Mylio clipboard down here at the bottom. So from there, I can go to, let's see here, I'm pretty sure I have a one here for maybe laugh or funnies or something like that. Let's go here to this list here, funnies or laugh. I'm pretty sure I have something for this. Anyway, I don't remember where it is now. So let's say I want to take this and I want to go into, let's just put it in memorabilia. So I have my memorabilia folder here. You can see I just switched my view. This picture here is still right where I left it. I can then grab it and drag it up here and plop it into one of these subfolders. Or if I just put it here into the main area, it's going to go into part of that top level folder. So I can just drag and drop, let that go. And that's now been physically moved from that other location to this folder here. So, and you'll see the clipboard disappeared from the bottom, and that's it. The clipboard is very easy to use. I really like it. Some people love it. Some people don't really find it useful. It's totally up to you whether you want to use that. All right. So the other question that I get often is moving files and folders between devices. So when you add things to Mylio, a lot of people want to take pictures that are stored on one device and have them stored somewhere else. And it can be really confusing to know how to do that within Mylio because all of your folders that you've added are all showing in one view and you're not exactly sure where those things are located. So the way to do that is with sync policies. So let's jump back into Mylio and take a look here at my top level folders view and just kind of go over again these linked folders. So everything that's up here in the top two sections, these are automatically going to be following my overriding sync policy, which for this computer is space saver. That means that Mylio is going to keep all of my original quality files on the vaults and only keep my optimized and thumbnails on this computer for browsing. Now, anything that I added here as a linked folder, these are going to stay in their original quality on this computer. But what if I don't want that to happen? One way to do that is, like we talked about earlier, is make it a library folder. You go into the dashboard and undo your link folders here and say, take this folder and mark it as a library folder. That's going to tell Mylio, hey, let's go ahead and apply the space saver to this folder as well, unless you choose this as an exception. And it's going to go ahead and offload those files to your vaults. And that's going to free up some space on your computer. Another thing you can do is if you have a folder that's on a specific device and you want to change what's being stored where, is here from your folders view, you have tap to sync. So over here in the right side of any folder, you have the tap to sync icon, and I went into my album. So just a second. There we go. And let's make this a little bit bigger. Here on the right corner is tap to sync. So it can use the device sync policy. You can say, I wanted to only store the optimized files locally, or I always want to have the original files stored locally. So you can specify how Mylio is supposed to handle these particular files. Now, once you make one of these changes, the next thing you want to do is go in and clear the cache. So you can choose which devices store original quality files, and you can use that mark as a library folder to go ahead and make that part of the space saver default. You can use tap to sync that I just showed you. And what you want to do once you make a change like this is to clear the cache. So you might not immediately notice a change to your storage space after making one of these changes. That's because Mylio, if it has enough space or within what space it's allowed to use, if that isn't maxed, Mylio is just going to leave it alone. So if you're wanting to free up that space, that's when you need to go in and clear the cache. So to do that, you go into the dashboard here on the left, and you have to do this on the device that you're using. You can't, like I can't go clear the cache for my iPad, for example. So from this particular Mac, next column down, go ahead and scroll down and click that clear cache button. It's going to go ahead and calculate how many files are on this machine that it doesn't need. And in this case, I could free up 104,000 optimized and 5,500 originals. Maybe I want to keep the optimized there, so I'm going to uncheck optimize, go ahead and move the originals. I know those are safely protected on my vaults, so I could say yes and free up a good bit of space if I did this. I'm not going to go ahead and do that right now, but anytime you make a sync policy change, make sure you go in and clear the cache. That's going to go ahead and free up that space, because if that doesn't happen, sometimes you're going, I made a change. Why am I not seeing it in the system? This is why, because you need to go in and clear the cache. All right. Are there any questions on that before we get to some last minute wrap up things? I know this has been a big, long, in-depth session.
There's quite a few questions, but we can get to that at the end.
All right. Oh, I do want to touch on auto-organize. One more thing. So auto-organize is a way to organize your folders and folder system. This could be its own coffee break. So I'm going to just touch on this very, very lightly, and we can go into it more in a separate session. But what it does is it automatically sorts a given folder by date. And to do this, you have to be in the everything space. And let me go ahead and quickly show you how that works. I'm going to go back here to Mylio, to my folders view, and I'm going to say, let's go ahead and auto-organize this folder here. Now, again, I went back to the public space. So if I try to do it right now, it's not going to let me. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to my everything space and put in my pin code. Oops. Go back one level. And so I have this folder selected. I can right click on that, go to more folder actions, and choose organize folders. And this is going to let me choose how I want to have this broken down. So let's just go ahead and choose by year. What this is going to do is create subfolders for all the media that are in this particular folder. Right now it only has 3 images, and I think they are all from this year. But then it'll create a year folder, and based on the metadata on those images, group them into folders. So let's go ahead and just say year and organize now. And it's going to go ahead and arrange that. Now when I go into this folder, there we go. You can see I now have a 2022 and a 2024. So it automatically organized things. There are ways to customize this. There are ways to move them into other directories. Like I said, it gets a little bit more complex. The easiest way to do this is folder by folder, and then move things around as needed. So I did want to point out that that exists. It's a very cool feature, but like I said, it can get very complex and really is worthy of its own entire coffee break. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about some of the things that you need to consider as you go through and reorganize your library. And that's maintaining the integrity of your data. So because Mylio is managing your hard drive, there are a few things to consider. as you go through this. So the first one is going to be to keep an eye on your activities monitor. Let me go ahead and show you where that is. That is this little guy right up here in the top. You can open that up and see what processes Mylio is running. If it's running a bunch of processes and you want to go ahead and move more things around, you might want to pause and let some of those other processes finish before you throw more things at it, because it can get bogged down, and depending on the specs of your computer, it might overwhelm your computer. So just kind of keep that in mind, keep an eye on the activities panel here, and that's going to give you an idea of how much your computer can handle at any one time. If it starts acting slow, if it starts kind of being bogged down because you've been moving things around and reorganizing, give that a check and see what's going on. The other thing that you're going to want to check is, giving things time to process your notifications. Check the notifications, which is this little bell. And that's going to tell you if anything is throwing an error. So as you're moving things around, as you're deleting things, it's going to tell you what's happened here. And if it pops up with a little red dot up here on the bell, that usually means that there's some sort of error. For instance, there's been times when I've gone to delete a folder and it says, I can't delete the folder because there are files in there that Mylio can't read. So there's only certain types of files that Mylio can show in the program. And there might be other types of files that Mylio can't read that live in that folder. If that is the case, Mylio is going to say, hey, I can't delete that folder because I don't want to delete things that I'm not aware of. So it might throw an error, and this is going to give you some other additional information that you can work off of if you need to. So watch for errors. And then the final piece of advice I have is let other devices sync before making any additional changes. So if you're doing a lot of work on, let's say, your computer, and then you go pick up your iPad, you're like, okay, I'm done at the computer, I'm going to go sit on the sofa, but then you decide to pick up your iPad and pull up Mylio again. Let Mylio have a chance to sync to that iPad, check that activities on your iPad, see where things are at before you start making major changes on another device. Because you can certainly continue doing your work on a different device, but let things get in sync before you start doing that. Let everything get moved around, because if you move things on one device and then you start moving things on another device, and Mylio doesn't have a chance to kind of crunch those things together, it can make a mess. So just kind of keep those things in mind as you go through. Well, I want to thank you guys all for joining me today. This has been a very long session, longer than our typical coffee break. So thank you for hanging in there with me. I hope it was useful. We covered a lot. If anything was confusing or you need clarification on anything, please feel free to message me in the community and I'll do my best to answer those questions. Also, I believe Lori's got the post poll up. If there's anything that you want to see more in depth in a future coffee break, that's a great place to let us know. And then we can go ahead and get those planned for you guys. We want to make sure that we're covering topics that you want to learn more about. So with that, I want to wish you guys a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next week. Thank you, Lori, so much for helping out in the background, keeping track of the chat, sharing the links. Always much appreciated. So we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.